Hi, it's Charles and welcome back to my channel. That was good, right? I think that was a better opening. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the Criterion Collection. I know I've been talking about the Criterion Collection quite a bit with my first two videos, but I'm still pretty new on making videos, so I think I get a pass for not having as big a content pool right now, if you ask me personally. But anyway, for those of you who don't know what the Criterion Collection is, the Criterion Collection is dedicated to gathering the greatest films from around the world and publishing them in editions of the highest technical quality with supplemental features that enhance the appreciation for the art of film. Quite a mouthful if you ask me, but I memorized all of that, so ha! So the first two Criterions I ever bought were both from Amazon, and as I said in a previous video, Mulholland Drive was my second movie I ever bought from the Criterion Collection. The first one I'll keep a secret for now until my complete Criterion Collection video I make, because that one not only was my first and it's special for that reason alone, but because the movie itself has a special place in my heart, so I'll talk about it more in that video when that one comes. But yeah, I think it was just crazy how I got into the Criterion Collection and how I started collecting them, because when I got those first two movies from Amazon, I think a week or two later, they announced on Barnes & Noble's they were having their biannual sale, and I was like, this seems like it's a sign that I should get into them since they're all on sale now. So I started buying them, and it was kind of a mess personally. It was a mess because I didn't know what I was gonna buy. I honestly went into the Barnes & Noble's in Seattle at random and was just like, what looks good? I just looked at the cover art and I had to like Google what the movie was and their Rotten Tomato scores, and I was just like, you gotta pick some because a lot of these are interesting, but I just don't know which one to choose. I think the first ever haul I had, I bought about maybe 10 Criterions, and safe to say, after I watched all of them, I sold a few of them because I was not feeling them. I personally think that maybe a video of some essential or starter Criterions would be very helpful, because just blind buying Criterions is very hard because you never know what you're gonna get unless you've done the research on them or you've watched the movie before. So I was like, maybe I'll make a video with a few Criterions that I think everyone would like, ones that would be easy to digest, and ones that would help people get a flavoring of the Criterion Collection in general and what kind of movies they put out. So yeah. Without further ado, I'm gonna show you my recommendation list for my starter pack of Criterions that everyone should maybe start off with. But before I do, maybe you could like this video, maybe subscribe, if you like me, my personality. Content yet to see, but it will grow eventually with time. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first movie on my recommendation list is Silence of the Lambs, which is, I feel like everyone knows what Silence of the Lambs is, but Jonathan Demme's movie with Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins, very awarded movie, won the big top 5 Oscars, one of only 3 movies to do that, alongside with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and It Happened One Night. But yeah, this movie is definitely one of their most mainstream movies in the collection, and I'm like, if you're gonna have a Criterion, maybe it should be this one. It's a very good upgraded version of the Blu-ray that came out before, and also, who wouldn't want to watch Silence of the Lambs? It's a great movie with some admittedly like transphobic stuff with Buffalo Bill, but that's neither here nor there. Jonathan Demme apologized for that, and he saw the problems with that, but he was like, I'm very sorry, I did not see that, and I'm like, okay, apologies accepted, we're gonna move on, because this movie is too great to let that one little thing hinder it. But yeah, Silence of the Lambs, it boggles my mind that Laura Dern could have been Clarice Starling, but the studio was just like, she's not big enough star yet, and I was like, we could have had a Laura Dern Oscar win for Best Lead Actress. Blows my mind. It blows my mind that we could have had that. And honestly, I know Anthony Hopkins was put as lead, but I honestly feel like that's category fraud. But, you know, the whole thing where people are like, well, you think about him the whole movie, and I'm like, I guess the lingering effect works out here, but it's whatever. But yeah, Silence of the Lambs. It's a great horror thriller movie, one of the best ones, and I'm just like, Jonathan Demme executed that movie perfectly. And I'm like, that's why I feel like this is one of the Criterions that you should get if you are starting collecting Criterions, because I'm like, it's just such a mainstream movie, as I said, super digestible, and there's nothing really hard to grasp onto it. It's just great, and it's really easy to see why it's great. So yeah, that's the first one I recommended. The next movie I have on my list is The Red Shoes from Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger. And I'm like, this movie I don't hear enough people talking about on YouTube. I've seen a lot of complete Criterion collections and like hauls and all that, but I've never seen anyone talk about this movie, and I'm like, why? Because this movie is not only beautiful to watch because of the cinematography from Jack Cardiff, but also because the story is just great. And I'm like, why haven't people watched this? Why? Tell me why, if you've never watched this. Is it because you've never heard about it, or you just don't care to watch it? Because I'm just curious why no one seems to be talking about this movie when it comes to Criterions. I mean, Darren Aronofsky drew inspiration from The Red Shoes to make Black Swan. He took inspiration from both The Red Shoes and also A Perfect Blue to make Black Swan happen, and I'm like, the brilliance, because Red Shoes is a story about a ballet dancer who works herself basically to death for her art, and I'm like, come on, that is totally Black Swan. If you love Black Swan, you gotta watch The Red Shoes, because the story is just magnificent. The cinematography, as I said, from Jack Cardiff is beautiful. The sequence when they're doing the Red Shoes story on stage is magical. It's magical. And I'm just like, I need more people to be watching it and talking about it, because all these videos I keep seeing, no one talks about the Red Shoes, not about watching it, having watched it, or wanting to buy it, and I'm like, why is that? I mean, seriously, why is that? Tell me why you have not watched the Red Shoes. Is it because you've never heard about it, or what? Because I'm just baffled. Because on the Criterion channel, it's listed under Essential Art House movies, so I'm like, if it's so essential, why have people not seen it? I mean, it's not a hard movie to watch. That's why I'm recommending it, because I'm like, it's a gorgeous movie, great story, and it's just a nice movie. So I'm like, I personally think this is one that people should have and watch first in the Criterion collection, but I don't know. People just aren't talking about it when they talk about Criterions, and I think that's crazy. The next movie I'm going to talk about is In the Mood for Love from Wong Kar-wai, and I'm just like, if you love romance, then this is the movie for you. I know it's in a different language, but come on, people. If you can't read subtitles, then I'm just like, just admit that you can't read fast, because that's really just the problem here. But anyway, In the Mood for Love is gorgeous. All these movies I keep recommending, they're gorgeous. Like, the cinematography done on all of them are amazing. But this one really utilizes the color of red. Like, red, 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 everywhere. Red for passion, and I'm like, yes, because this movie is boiling passion. And I'm like, both Maggie Cheung and Tony Liu, is it Tony? Yeah, maybe I didn't pronounce his last name right. Maybe I can't pronounce it if I didn't pronounce it right earlier. But anyway, the two of them are so great in this movie. They're so hot. And I'm like, yeah, this is a great romance movie. And I feel like this movie bounces off A Brief Encounter. And both A Brief Encounter and this movie, like, inspired Carol. So I'm like, a lot of lonely romance movies bouncing off each other to make great pieces of art. But yeah, this one, I feel like people really gotta watch it. And another one that no one talks about, which is baffling to me. But yeah, In the Mood for Love was one of my first Criterions I ever bought, and I'm like, when I watched it for the first time, I was like, this is crazy good. And I'm pretty sure I cried like 2 or 3 times toward the end because I was like, I'm so sad at what's happening, and the emotions, the emotions. And I feel like a lot of people would choose maybe the Chungking Express over In the Mood for Love when it comes to Wong Kar-wai movies in the Criterion Collection. But the thing is, the Chungking Express is an out-of-print copy, so I'm just like, y'all gonna have to choose In the Mood for Love if you're gonna choose one of his movies from the Criterion Collection. And also because I just think In the Mood for Love is better, but that's just my opinion. But yeah, you guys should check it out because I think it's about 2 hours long, but it flies by really fast, for me anyway. The next movie on my list is Stagecoach from John Ford. This movie has a pretty great ensemble cast. Yeah, that's what I was looking for, great ensemble cast. And I'm pretty sure this is the movie that kind of launched John Wayne into prominence, which is he's really good in this movie, but at the same time I'm like, John Wayne is not it. He's not it for multiple reasons. Y'all need to do research, because if you research John Wayne and what he was about, I'm like, in 2020 he would be DOA. He would not be liked at all. But I heard, I don't know how liked he was back then, but he was very oof with his views. But anyway, Stagecoach. It's a seminal Western. It's one of the only Westerns I like to watch. And I picked this up because Quentin Tarantino said that this movie was part of the reason why The Hateful Eight came about. He drew a lot of inspiration from this movie, and watching it I was like, yeah, I can see why he drew inspiration from this movie. It just screams great Western, and also there's a lot of stuff with confined people in spaces, and I'm like, yeah, I can see how The Hateful Eight came about from this. But yeah, Stagecoach is a really digestible Western. I keep saying digestible and mainstream when I'm talking about these movies because I'm like, I'm trying to give you a sampling of the Criterion Collection, but also ones that aren't so hard to watch, because there's a lot of movies in the Criterion Collection that I'm like, this is great, but at the same time I'm like, I don't think a lot of people would be able to understand what's going on or dig this, which is why all these movies, I'm like, these are movies that I believe could be easily watched and analyzed by people on their first viewing. So yeah, but anyway, Stagecoach, I'm like, it's a great Western, it's short, it's sweet, it's exciting, and I'm like, yeah, if you're gonna own a Western, it might as well be Stagecoach because it's a great one of the great Westerns. The next movie in my recommendation list is Rosemary's Baby from Roman Polanski, and yes, the controversial Roman Polanski. I'm just like, one of the greatest filmmakers, yes, but we can't really regard him as a great person or like him really anymore. But I'm like, we can appreciate his art that he's put out, the past art before all the crazy stuff went down with his illegal stuff. I'm just like, that's why I can still stand Rosemary's Baby. But yes, Rosemary's Baby, it changed the game for horror movies before The Exorcist. Didn't get any, I don't think it, no, it did get Oscar nominations because I'm pretty sure Ruth Gordon won for Best Supporting, which is a good win in itself. But I'm like, yeah, this movie like changed the game when it came to horror movies. It changed the culture because the culture was shifting back then in the late 60s when this came out. I believe this came out in 1968. So it really changed people's perception of things going into the 70s. And I'm just like, yeah, this movie's fantastic. Mia Farrow is brilliant. She should have gotten an Oscar nomination. And John Cassavetes is hot in this movie. Very hot. But yeah, Rosemary's Baby, I'm just like, it's a great horror movie, and I feel like it's one of those movies that people have heard about, but a lot of people haven't actually watched. And I'm like, this is your chance to watch it now. It's in the Criterion Collection for a reason. It made a huge impact when it came out, and honestly, the restoration on this edition is great, and I really want to rewatch it. I haven't watched it in a long while, but I'm just like, parts of that movie stick in my brain so much because of how terrifying the movie was, and I'm like, once again, I hate giving credit to that guy, but Roman Polanski did that. He did that. And I'm like, you can't deny greatness, which is why I'm like, this is another Criterion you should pick up on First Haul, because I'm like, it's an iconic movie. And I'm like, if you're gonna start with Criterion movies, I feel like you should have a splattering of some that are well known, but also some that are unknown to you. That way you have a good mix of things, you know? The next movie I have on my list is Nashville from Robert Altman. Robert Altman has a bunch of movies in the Criterion Collection, but I'm like, this is the one that I think, I wouldn't say the best, because I feel like The Player is the best, but that's just my personal opinion. But I feel like Nashville should be the one you watch because it's such a powerful portrayal of America, and to this day I'm like, I feel like it still rings very true to what America is in some ways, even though America right now is pretty trash. But then again, America's always been trash in a lot of ways, so but anyway, Nashville, I'm like, it's a great movie. Robert Altman directed it to perfection, and the cast is amazing, and I'm just like, yeah, Nashville. People need to talk about Nashville more because once again, I'm like, I don't see people having Nashville in their collections or even talking about Nashville, so I'll need to watch Nashville. Nashville. I'm just gonna keep saying Nashville. But seriously, the ending of Nashville, I'm just like, why is this America? Why is this America in a nutshell? Like something goes down at the end of Nashville, and I'm just like, the way it's handled by the people, I'm like, this feels very America. No matter what time period you're in, I'm like, it feels very America. And I'm just like, wow, why do 70s movies really still hold power today? That's why I'm just like, if we're talking about best decade of movies, I'm like, the 70s, man. The 70s have the receipts for best movies. But yeah, Nashville, I keep getting off track. It's 3 hours long, but I'm gonna say it moves by really fast because you have so many compelling characters and storylines, and I don't know, the movie's just never boring, and I feel like it's just a great way to get into Robert Altman, who basically is one of the pioneers in cinema. That's why, and yeah, he is a pioneer in cinema, hands down, period. So I'm like, you really gotta have a Robert Altman movie in your Criterion collection, and I'm like, why not start with Nashville? I would say maybe you can go with The Player, but I'm just like, The Player is more for people who love Hollywood and what goes on behind the scenes, and also it's also like a whodunit mystery. So I'm like, if you like that kind of stuff, then check out The Player. In fact, here's The Player. The Player, I wish they had more dynamic artwork for this one, but it's oh well. And yeah, I don't know why I'm going off on this tangent, but I'm going off on this tangent. Let's just say it's a double. You can either choose Nashville or The Player, because The Player is honestly everything I love about Hollywood, the behind the scenes stuff of Hollywood, and it's just a great like whodunit mystery, and I'm just like, the ending, I'm like, it's perfection. It's perfection. Very much what would happen. But yeah, I just love this movie, and I love how many stars cameo in it. I'm just like, wow, Robert Altman has the pull. He has the pull. But yeah, this one's only 2 hours long, so maybe if you want a shorter one, you can go with The Player, and I feel like The Player might be a little bit more enjoyable for some people. So once again, choose The Player or Nashville, one of the two, because they're both great Robert Altman movies in the collection. I'm not saying that Shortcuts isn't good, but I'm just like, I'm not saying it's as good as this and Nashville. So once again, choose Nashville or The Player because these are two great Criterions that should be in your collection and talked about. The next one in my recommendation list is Blue Velvet from David Lynch. I know I already showed Mulholland Drive, but Mulholland Drive's a bit of a head turner. It's a head scratcher for most people. And I'm just like, why not go with Blue Velvet? Because I'm like, I feel like Blue Velvet is the most digestible of the David Lynch movies, and there's that word again, digestible. And I'm like, because you really get a lot of what this movie's trying to say right off the bat. And I'm like, even if you don't, like, a second viewing would be very easy for you to realize what David Lynch is trying to say with this movie. But yeah, I think it's a brilliant movie. Kyle MacLachlan and Isabel Rossellini and Laura Dern are all great. I don't remember the guy who's the villain in this movie, but he turned it out for this movie. And I'm like, I never get tired of watching Blue Velvet. It's such a seedy movie about the underbelly of suburbia. And I'm like, who doesn't like a dark crime mystery movie? Seriously. Personally, I think David Lynch's films all deserve like recognition. I mean, I guess all except for Dune, because apparently Dune was a flop. But yeah, there's a reason why mostly all of David Lynch's movies are on Criterion. The Elephant Man's gonna be on the Criterion collection soon, and I haven't watched that one. But once I get the Criterion, I'm gonna watch it. So, but yeah, I'm just like Blue Velvet is really the most digestible because it's framed in a murder mystery kind of thing. Unlike Mulholland Drive, which is also like a whodunit in a sense, that one has too many layers for some people to peel back. And also, that was supposed to be a show originally, so there are things that are open-ended that some people just didn't understand. And I'm not gonna lie, I had to really rewatch and like read reviews on Mulholland Drive about certain things, which is why I'm like, Blue Velvet is the way to go, because when I watched Blue Velvet for the first time, I was like, man, I was like, all this stuff underneath the surface, and I'm like, you instantly get what Blue Velvet is trying to say, which is why I'm like, Blue Velvet is the movie you should get. And also, Blue Velvet is just David Lynch. It's David Lynch in a nutshell of what he does, which is why I'm like, you gotta have this movie, because they love David Lynch, the Criterion Collection, and I'm like, this movie will show you why. It's just art. Art. Art is what all these movies are. Okay, so the next on my list is Election from Alexander Payne. I almost forgot the name for a second, but I remembered it at the end. Alexander Payne, starring Reese Witherspoon and Matthew Broderick. This movie, honestly, has aged so well. It's aged so well. If you look at today's political like environment, I'm like, this movie basically is super, super relevant. And I'm just like, everyone should see it, because not only is it a good high school movie, but I'm like, it's a great movie exploring politics in high school. But those things can still be applied to politics at large. I remember a lot of people saying that Reese Witherspoon is the villain in this movie, and the first time I watched it, I was like, I don't think so. The second time I watched it, I was like, I really don't think she's the villain. The third time I watched it, I was like, no, y'all are tripping. She is legit not the villain. The villain is Matthew Broderick, and y'all who don't think he's the villain, I'm like, y'all need to check your like morals, because he does a lot of bad things in this movie. And I'm like, Tracy Fleck isn't like the perfect person, but I'm like, she doesn't deserve all this hate and negativity that's getting thrown toward her. And I'm like, a part of that, I'm like, is because people just don't like women, they hate women. Gotta say it, like, flat out. This movie is so great at dissecting politics at such an early time in people's lives in high school, and I'm like, wow, people should watch this, because this movie's only, I think it recently turned 20 years old last year. Yeah, last year I think it turned 20 years old, and people who've seen it know how brilliant it is. It's one of Alexander Payne's best movies, and it's honestly one of Reese Witherspoon's best performances. I honestly believe she should have gotten an Oscar nomination for it, and she drew her inspiration for her performance from Nicole Kidman in To Die For, and it's so funny because Rosalind, um, Rosamund Pike, God, I'm gonna be electrocuted for not knowing her name right off the back of my head, but Rosamund Pike drew inspiration for her Amy Dunn character from both Nicole Kidman and a bit from Reese Witherspoon's Election character, because of how determined the two of them were, and how like they were willing to do whatever they needed to do to win and get what they wanted. And I was like, yeah, brilliant performances that inspire more people to do brilliant performances. That's, you gotta see it. You gotta see Reese Witherspoon's performance here, because honestly, young Reese Witherspoon was a beast. She was tearing through performance after performance. Not that the Reese Witherspoon we have right now isn't doing that, but I'm just saying, young Reese Witherspoon, she was in her bag. She was in her bag back in the day, and I'm like, y'all have to experience this movie, because it's great, and it's short too, which is why I'm like, again, another digestible movie that you're able to understand what it's trying to convey to you right off the bat. The next movie I'm going to show you is Valley of the Dolls, another movie that no one ever talks about when it comes to Criterions, but I feel like this is something that the Criterion Collection should be linked to, because the Criterion Collection talks about, I know how it says in the back of their things, how they gather the greatest films from around the world, and lots of people don't consider this great. I consider it great personally. But another thing they pride themselves is releasing movies that have had a cultural impact. And this movie definitely had a cultural impact at the time. And I'm like, lots of people were reading the book, and when this movie came out, it was a smash hit, which is why they were like, we need to release this because it was a moment in time. This movie was a moment in time when people were really excited about film. It might not be the best film that people watch from the Criterion Collection, but honestly, it's a complete blast. It really like is a great look at Hollywood and how it kind of Hollywood basically ruins people, and I just think it's so good. And also, there's a great performance in this movie from the wonderful ... My mind is stuck. Hold up for a second. Patty Duke, I'm so sorry, baby girl. Patty Duke, Oscar winner Patty Duke from The Miracle Worker. She is the person giving the performance in this movie. When she screams Neely in the end of this movie in an alleyway full of trash and all that, while she's just like, she's just going for it. And people are like, she's over the top in this movie. But I'm like, I think she delivered the performance the movie needed. She knew the assignment and she delivered exactly what was needed. But yeah, Valley of the Dolls, I really just think it's a really good movie. They released Valley of the Dolls together with Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, which is a separate thing on its own, but I honestly love both those movies because, I don't know, they're just a lot of fun and can really show how the Criterion Collection isn't all about being stuffy with these high art movies, how sometimes they just delve into movies that are just fun and had cultural impacts. And I'm just like, yeah, you should watch Valley of the Dolls because also it is Sharon Tate, who was, she was married. She was married to Roman Polanski. But you know how this is one of her biggest films of her career before, she was murdered. Which is why lots of people watch this movie for Sharon Tate, but the thing is Sharon Tate is like not even the biggest person in this movie as in screen time, honestly. I think the other girl, which I feel so bad for forgetting her name, but she and Patty Duke have the breadth of the screen time while Sharon Tate is kind of in the background for most of the movie. She's like the person with the third most screen time, but she's nice in the movie. But yeah, I'm like Valley of the Dolls. I feel like people need to give it more respect. And especially watching it in 2020, I'm like, this is camp, you guys. This is camp, what this movie is, and some of y'all don't know how to enjoy campy movies because y'all just want serious stuff, but sometimes a good campy movie can be really good in general. So the last movie on my recommendation list is actually a box set, because I was like, we should give a box set in this recommendation list. But what I have, what I'm going to show you is the Before trilogy from Richard Linklater. Yeah, I feel like everyone talks about this trilogy and this box set for a reason. It's for a reason. These movies are brilliant. The first one, I'm just like, give it to me. The second one, it took me a while for it to grow on me, but after a while, I think on my second or third viewing of Before Sunset, that's the second one. Before Sunset, I was crying and I was like, wow, this is great. And Before Midnight is honestly devastating because it feels like reality is coming down. Like the first two movies feel like we're in a fairy tale of a sense or in some other world, but Before Midnight, you're just crashing into reality and everything is not happy anymore and we're just like, okay, reality of marriage and love, harsh. But yeah, the Before trilogy is just a perfect box set. If you're gonna go for a box set your first time around collecting Criterions, I'm like, the Before trilogy is the one you should get because Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy are brilliant in the movie and they co-wrote all three movies with Richard Linklater. They didn't get credit on the first one, but they did the second two, which is why I'm like, good. I'm like, good that they got credit because that sucks that they didn't get credit on the first one because the first one is my favorite. And I'm just like, Their performances in the movie are so naturalistic and it feels like it's just all coming naturally off them, but hearing them talk about in interviews and all that, they were like, these are all highly staged and choreographed, and I'm like, wow, the precision and the acting, it blows my mind. They both should have got nominations for one of the movies because they're so brilliant in them. And also the screenplays, I'm pretty sure the first two got nominated. Maybe the first one got nominated too, but I'm like, I feel that they never won for the screenplay for Before Sunset or Before Midnight, because I'm like, these screenplays are great. The Criterion Collection has a few Richard Linklater movies too. They have Dazed and Confused, Slacker, and Boyhood also in this collection, but I feel like the Before trilogy is that girl. It's that girl, and I just love watching movies that has so much emotion dripping from them, and I'm like, the Before trilogy really gives you everything you could want. Yeah, I'm just like, box set, pick up the Before trilogy, because that is honestly their best box set at a pretty great price too, so you should start there if you're going to start with any of the box sets, because it's a great one. It's the greatest one, actually. I don't know anyone that's better than the Before trilogy box set. Yeah. So with that, that concludes my recommendation list slash starter pack of Criterions that you should own if you don't own any Criterions. And if you already own Criterions, maybe this list has shown you some movies that you should watch and maybe buy in the future, because honestly, these movies, they are great for me, but you know, everyone has their own taste, so maybe they might not be great for you, but that will be for you to decide, and all of that. But yeah, tell me in the comments below if you've seen any of these movies, or if you haven't, and what do you think of about them, because I'm always interested in talking to people about film, and I'm just like, these ones in the Criterion Collection, I'm just like, I feel they're the most accessible ones that people can watch, and that everyone should watch, to be honest. And honestly, I would have put more foreign films on here, but once again, I'm just like, I feel like In the Mood for Love is one for people to already start with. I didn't want to throw like a Bergman in there or someone else who's foreign in there, because I'm like, a lot of people for some reason cannot read subtitles, so I was like, we're only going to throw one movie with subtitles in this recommendation list. But yeah. Anyway, you guys, thanks for coming and watching again. My next video will not be about the Criterion Collection. I promise you that. It might take a while to make this next video happen, but I'm so excited about it. Thank you for watching, and yeah, thank you for watching video 3. I'm still here, you guys. And for all y'all that are sticking around, I thank you a lot. Really. Anyway, you guys, remember to like and subscribe, and yes. Yeah. That's it. That's all, folks. Is that a better ending?